Whew.
All right, Benjamin Button.
I'm so nervous.
Don't be. I'm a very comforting co-host, don't you worry.
You just told me to shove that light bulb up my eye.
No, I said some people would like that. I told you to shove this.
Oh, okay. Thank you for
Let's
correcting
just
me.
be
That's
clear.
perfect.
Light bulbs are dangerous and sharp.
I'd be so terrified it would break. That's
Dude, you should be terrified of it.
Oh, there are a lot of ways to build an app, right?
There's two ways to build an app, Ben. The right way and the wrong way.
Okay. Well, one of the right ways is with cross-platform development. Typically, when you're getting an iOS app or an Android app built, you're getting it built specifically for that platform, and you've got a lot of platform-specific code involved. Cross-platform development helps in a lot of ways with that, and it's really been gaining a lot of traction the last few years as technologies have improved. The frameworks that are being used for cross-platform development have improved, where before there were a lot of pros and cons to it, a lot of trade-offs. It's becoming a lot more mainstream and maintainable as an option.
Yeah, and what do we mean when we are even saying cross-platform? Because everyone's like, well, yeah, if you have the app on multiple devices, it's clearly cross-platform. So cross-platform is nice because it allows you to have a single code base and then compile, build, and publish to all these different devices like iOS, Android, tablets, web. It just makes it easier to have your code all in one place, which means less resources, which is super important for like bootstrapped companies and new startups.
Yeah. I won't go too much into it. Jacob yells at me when I bring up games too much, but it's the same idea. In fact, it is the same thing as a game engine where I build the game once in Unreal Engine or Unity or Godot, and then I can go ahead and just export it to PS5, Xbox Series S or Xbox One or whatever, PC, Linux, Mac, everywhere. And it's all the same code base. So there are a lot of trade-offs in the past that we've had with this and a lot of reasons to use it.
Throughout the years, I feel like cross-platform development has really gained in popularity as well.
Yeah.
Like not only like there's like Flutter, React Native. I'm sure there's a bunch more. But
Xamarin is one.
Yeah.
You and Jack tried using Xamarin once.
I have used Xamarin. And what's nice is it allows you to create all these apps for different devices faster, because as one developer, I write one app and I can publish it to 3 devices or 3 different app stores. So it saves a lot of time, which in the startup world means a lot of money.
Yeah, for sure. And you can catch a lot of things early on both platforms using cross-platform development. Having that single code base is incredibly important when you're trying to move fast and you're trying to get a product out. That's because traditionally when you're developing an app for iOS and Android, for example, let's just focus on those two. You've got an iOS code base and you've got an Android code base. Each of those code bases is being worked on by different people who are experts in Swift development or Objective-C, depending on what you're doing, and Java or Kotlin for Android. They're going in 2 different directions. They do the same thing, but there's different architecture involved. There's different code. There's different languages involved, all kinds of syntax things, different ways of storing things on those devices. And it gets tricky and you end up with this thing where you look at it and it can be completely different from one another.
Mm-hmm.
And from that come a lot of bugs, because you can have something implemented in iOS that works perfectly and then something in Android that doesn't work at all. It's throwing a lot of errors and vice versa. And so you have this situation where we're having a bug. It's iOS only. So iOS has to get an update. Android doesn't because it's got different bugs or doesn't have that bug. But having it all in one code base means
it allows you to fix your bug in one spot, and
Yep.
you're way less likely to have individual bugs.
Yes.
Like from iOS to Android. It still can happen.
It can happen,
But it's less likely, and it's probably not a bug on your behalf at that point if it is platform related.
Yeah. So you can maintain it a lot easier. It's a lot easier to manage, a lot easier to deal with, fix a bug once or build a feature once, and it's everywhere. I think,
and then you ship it to all your platforms.
Yep.
And
I think most people have had the experience of this feature is available on Android, but not iOS, or vice versa.
Yeah, it happens so much because they'll always test their flagship device with a new feature. And then whichever one isn't used the most by probably the founder that gets the new feature. That's usually what it is. Yeah. So if the founder's an Apple guy, Apple's going to see all the new features first.
And it can be like 3 to 6 months ahead.
Oh, for sure. Because they don't want to give the resources.
Yep.
Or they're busy ironing it out on one platform.
And so a lot of delays can happen, upset customers, all that kind of stuff, which is why, it's become so much more popular and a lot more common to have that single code base. And on top of that, like I mentioned earlier, you don't need a specialist for each platform. You, of course, still want devices for each platform and a tester for each platform, making sure that all your bases are covered. But if I want to add a feature to an app, I don't need to go contract out somebody to do the iOS and contract out somebody to do the Android.
Yeah, you don't need a Kotlin guy and a Swift guy anymore.
Yep.
You just need, and with smaller companies, you kind of just need probably a JavaScript dev that can do your back end and like React Native or something like that for the front end.
I mean, depending on which route you want to go.
Right.
There are a lot of different options and a lot of reasons to pick between them, but we'll talk about that more in a minute.
There are a ton of pros to cross-platform development. And one we touched on is development's just expensive in general, right?
Yeah.
Every engineer you put on your team is going to roughly cost you probably $100,000 a year.
Yep.
Like that's just a good average, right? So cutting that down, you just need less. You need less engineers, so you get your product out quicker. And so with like cross-platform apps, not only are you saving money, you're reducing your team size and getting features turned around quicker, like across all devices, instead of waiting 6 months for Android to catch up to your iOS app.
Yeah, well, and you can also have misunderstandings between the two teams where we give them a spec and we say, okay, well, this is what we want this feature to do. And Android implements it one way, iOS implements it another way. And then we have back and forth between the engineers of, oh, wait, what were we supposed to do? Oh, crap.
Yeah, now you have one team to manage instead of two.
Yeah. So it makes communication between the teams a lot easier and just faster in general. Beyond just, hey, we have to hire less devs. It usually takes less time to do it overall than a purely native solution.
Yeah. And if your goal is just proof of concept, it is amazing for rapid development.
Oh, yeah.
Unless you're leveraging some very specific feature of the brand new iPhone that came out, you're not going to run into much resistance with using cross-platform.
Yeah, but that's usually not an issue anyways.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a catch-22. Yes, you're not going to have access to the latest and greatest for that native platform more often than not. Mm-hmm. However, you usually don't anyways.
Yeah.
When Apple announces, hey, we've got this new feature for iOS 17 or whatever, it's usually 3 or 4 years before companies will actually implement that because...
And why is that?
It's because of audience reach.
Right.
With those new features, it's usually people who update immediately to iOS 17 are going to have access to this feature. But it's such a small percentage of people who, first off, upgrade that fast, and two, own devices that can go up to iOS 17.
Yeah.
That developers don't want to implement it just yet because next to nobody's actually going to be using it.
Well, and you always have to support older OSs, right? And so like when do OSs or operating systems get cut off? Like usually when they fall into not being used by like 2 to 4%.
Yeah.
Then you cut them off. And those are the older devices.
So if you've got to have all these workarounds and support the stuff anyways, if it's an absolute necessity, this is a life-changing feature, then yeah, you can do that. And sometimes developers do. But the general rule of thumb is it's going to be a few years before.
Yeah, you're going to base your features off the oldest OS that you support.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're doing too many silly hackery jobs like, well, if it's this OS, we can do this. And if it's not, we don't.
Which introduces all kinds of bugs.
Yes, it does.
Which is another pro for the cross-platform group, is these frameworks typically will have those internalized, like those workarounds. And so you as the developer don't have to go mess around with all of that. And oh, hey, on iOS 15.6.3, there's a weird rendering bug that I didn't know about. So when I implement this, it's going to be broken on that one device, and I'm going to be looking for 2 weeks to figure out why it's not working.
Yeah.
And so the cross-platform frameworks typically handle that. You don't have to worry about it, and it just makes your life a lot easier. So it helps with audience reach. It helps in a lot of ways. And like I said, the latest and greatest, you're typically not worrying about that anyways. And another thing with cross-platform development that's really improved over the last few years is performance. It used to be, a few years ago, I was looking at some benchmarks, and Flutter was benchmarking to be 25 to 50% slower.
Which is crazy.
Than a native app. It was a lot of problems and not really all that usable.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're basically comparable to native apps. In fact, Flutter actually compiles directly to bytecode the same way that Swift will compile to bytecode for iOS, and Kotlin will convert to Java and then bytecode for Android. So it's a different way of getting there, but it's almost native, is the output of Flutter. React Native has also improved a lot. There's Native Script, which we've used a lot, which works really well.
Native Script is really cool. So in the chance that you need to do something that's device specific, you can write code in the native language and use whatever you're required.
Yeah,
directly.
I've really liked Native Script because of that flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
If I, for example, if I want to access the latest and greatest feature, and yes, I do want that, I can go write a Swift file and say, okay, access it this way, and then tell Native Script this is where it's at.
Your hands aren't tied because you decided to do the cross-platform route at that point.
So there's tons of flexibility there, which is great. And the performance it's not as good as Flutter, but no web-based framework like that is. But it's still close.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think the numbers I was seeing a few weeks ago were like 10 to 15%, which you can easily handle with UIs. And if you're doing things right, the user will never know.
I want to say like most apps today are utility driven or self-improvement or scheduling, like a tool, not anything that ever leverages like AR to the fullest. Like you're not going to use an AR app daily.
Well, and even if you are, those typically aren't done in something like Flutter or Native Script, or even native, I'm going to do this in Swift and use Apple's AR kit directly.
Yeah.
If you've got a major AR-based app, it's typically done in a game engine.
I was going to just cut him off and be like, he's going to talk about a game engine.
I'm going to talk about your face.
I would say, like, if we talked about this, like, just 3 years ago, it wouldn't have nearly as many pros. There's a lot more cons. Like, everyone would say, no, you have to build native apps or they're just not going to have good performance. Yeah. And no one uses your app if you tap a button and you have to wait for it to react.
Yeah. But now it's a totally different story. Cross-platform has improved a lot. There can be problems, like Jacob mentioned earlier, with bugs that we don't have control over. And that's one of the reasons why I like Native Script for this option kind of thing, is because I have the control to go write my own if I need to.
You can at least code a Band-Aid until they get their shit together. But
if there's a bug in Flutter that causes rendering issues on this specific, going back to that example of 15.6.5 or 3 or whatever I said, there's a rendering issue. I can't control how Flutter handles that. And so it's just something that I have to live with, but I'm assuming that risk by using this framework.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a risk you always take whenever you're depending on like a library or framework you don't have direct control over.
Yeah. And it's not like that's really an avoidable thing at all, because there are tons of bugs just natively on the OS. So you never have full control over everything unless you decide the path for my app is to write my own operating system for people to download.
Someday.
Maybe ChatGPT can do that for me.
ChatGPT, write me an OS with all the spyware.
All of it.
I want you to data mine the shit out of me.
Oh, so it's not something you can always avoid, and it's just something you kind of have to accept.
I honestly don't think it is even a con that you even have to dwell on or worry about.
No. I'm including it for completeness.
Yeah.
But it's not something that I really worry about, especially with more established frameworks. Because if I was using some edge thing that 3 people in the world are using and it was written by some dude out in Pakistan, then sure, I would worry about the capabilities and those kind of bugs. But for more established frameworks like Flutter or Xamarin or NativeScript or React Native, it's not something that is really worth your time to worry about.
At Hired Gun Apps, we always push cross-platform unless we see a reason that it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Because one, it's cost effective for our clients and it works well. Like we haven't ran into any major problems with NativeScript.
Yeah. Most apps, everybody thinks my app needs all the newest, latest and greatest stuff all of the time, but most apps don't.
Right.
At all.
Yeah, it's very rare. One thing that you should consider when you're starting to do cross-platform, especially like PWAs or things like that.
Oh yeah.
Are you're limiting your ability to use device features.
Especially on iOS.
Because for whatever reason, iOS doesn't like your app if you don't bow down and pay their 30%.
They want their 30%.
They really want their 30%. If you're doing like a PWA, which is a progressive web app, you won't have access to like push notifications on the device. You're going to have to figure out more creative ways through email notifications, SMS messaging. There are ways around it. And I believe on Android devices, you can still access push notifications.
Yes, Android can do push notifications with PWAs. iOS cannot.
And then like you could be blocked from like geolocation and things of that nature. And of course, anything that really needs the like GPU of the phone or device, like AR or VR, you're very limited.
Yeah. So each of these frameworks comes with their own pros and cons you got to look at and their own capabilities. And really it comes down to what was this built for? And so you want to be aware of major features that you're going to want that seem basic, but there are things to consider from the start, like push notifications. When we were building Perfect Form to begin with, if I had realized how limited things were with push notifications, I don't know that we would have ended up going that route. Like I really liked the PWA, and I'm glad that we built it that way. But no push notifications on iOS makes experiences so clunky.
Yeah, it's very clunky. But I think we would have ran into problems when you have like a marketplace style thing where we're not making much on our transactions, and the App Store policies don't make it worthwhile.
Yeah. It's really rough. And there's a reason even Amazon and Rakuten, Kobo, all of these different marketplaces have it set up so you can only buy through their web portal and their apps are just readers. And I think that's what we would have ended up doing with Perfect Form, doing that exact same thing, because margins are so low that Apple taking 30% of your margins or whatever is just too much.
Yeah, we couldn't keep our servers on.
Yep. And so there are all kinds of reasons to look at your options and look at all those things, but you want to make sure that you're considering all of those basic features that you might need.
Yeah, so you want to like device or just features that your app is going to require to use of the device. And then also whatever your monetization strategy, that matters.
Yep.
So depending if you can put the app in the App Store, which you can with like Flutter, React Native, Xamarin, but you can't if it's a PWA.
Yes.
So there are, but you can throw a PWA and some wrappers and get it in the App Store. If you
Yeah, you
But
can,
it'd
but
be-
the App Store frowns upon
It
it.
would be gross, and everyone has seen the app that is just like a web view wrapped, you know?
That's
and,
essentially what it would
and
be.
that they don't work well.
Yeah. Always consider what features you're looking for. Cross-platform is great when you're looking to save some money and save some time and ship things out quickly. I think going forward, that's kind of where everything is gravitating towards.
I think it's the answer 95% of the time.
I mean, even with native development, for example, Kotlin, they have Jetpack Compose, which is a new UI framework. It's not really new now, but it came out a few years ago. But it's an Android framework for building out components for your UI, all that stuff, and you can build it in Kotlin. They're working on plugins for Swift so that you can build actual iOS UIs using Kotlin and Jetpack Compose and build it once in Kotlin, have it everywhere kind of thing. That's been the whole goal of Kotlin, which I have a love-hate relationship with that language, but even those native features, they're really trying to go cross-platform.
Mm-hmm.
And Swift, Apple doesn't really care
They don't try
about
to do
anybody else.
anything cross-platform.
No.
They don't even you can't even mention Android in an Apple app.
Yes.
So I think
But
that's silly.
I think things are slowly moving towards cross-platform everywhere anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just want to compare your options with cross-platform when you're building an app, if that sounds right for you. And that's one of the reasons why we like NativeScript so much, is we have all the benefits of cross-platform and we're not tied down to, we can't do that because we're using
and we can still
cross-platform.
pack it up and publish it like a native app.
Yep.
And it will respond and have responsiveness like a native app. So
Yep. And so it's a really great option. There are lots of great options out there. Just look at them, kind of compare what your needs are and what you feel comfortable with, because there's not a silver bullet. It's just like anything else with programming. Each of these frameworks has their strengths and weaknesses, and that changes by the build.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just want to look at the core strengths and weaknesses and what they can provide, what they offer, how easy it makes your life. But I think cross-platform is the right answer most of the time.
Yeah. And if you're out there wanting to build an app and not sure if cross-platform is an answer, reach out to us. We'd love to.
We'll tell you yes.
Yeah, we'll tell you yes. We'd love to have the conversation and hear about your app and help you figure it out. So
Yeah, for sure.
is that it?
Deuces, booses.
Bang,
Yeah.
bang.